Welcome back to the program. This is AIM Agenda, and with me now I've got Ed Husic from the Labor Party and Josh Frydenberg from the Liberals. Gentlemen, good morning to you.
Good morning, Kieran. Morning, Ed.
Josh, first to you. The bill passes this morning, or 18 bills of them, relating to the carbon tax. Is there a prospect that things will move on and that you will, the coalition that is, face the dilemma that Kim Beazley faced in the GST period when he promised a rollback and things just become unfeasible? It just can't work once compensations in place and tax cuts and so on.
Well, Kieran, today is a day of betrayal. The carbon tax is bad policy and it's going to be bad for Australia, and it's a complete breach of what the Prime Minister said only a few days before the last election. There'll be no carbon tax under the government she leads. It's going to lead to increased cost of living pressures. It's out of sync with what the rest of the world is doing, and it will not help the environment. So Tony Abbott is absolutely firm that he will repeal that legislation when in government.
But Josh Frydenberg, the part of this is tax reform, including lifting the tax-free threshold, I'm sure.
It's not really tax reform. Actually, marginal tax rates are going to be going up under this changes.
You don't think increasing the threshold is a reform?
Well, no, it's not about increasing the thresholds. It's actually the marginal tax rate actually going up.
Okay, well, but the bottom line is there are structural changes here that are going to be hard to wind back, aren't they?
Well, look, we'll have a mandate. If we win the next election, we will have a mandate because we've been consistent throughout. This government does not have a mandate. Remember what Abraham Lincoln said. He said, tell people the truth and the country will be safe. Well, this Prime Minister did not tell the people the truth, and now the country with a carbon tax is not safe. And so I think there are many lessons here for Julia Gillard about the way that she should restore integrity in government. That's why we moving an amendment to the carbon tax legislation, because we believe that the government should not be introducing it until after the next election.
It's not just Josh and the coalition saying this, Ed. We know that the Business Council of Australia is calling for a delay. Given the global uncertainty, the Eurozone instability, and the Australian Industry Group says that the price should be halved. There's a lot of nervous people in the business community about this, and probably increased by the likelihood that it'll be scrapped anyway.
Of course there are people nervous in the business community, because just as we're getting certainty on something that has been talked about for 20 years, the opposition is saying that they want to keep delaying and frustrating and denying business certainty in making plans to move on to a cleaner energy future. We are also going to experience politics and economics colliding. The politics of delay collide with the economics of every time you hold up this move to meet our bipartisan target, 5% cut in emissions by 2020, it's been estimated it'll cost about $5 billion a year extra to try and play catch-up with meeting that target. And that has to be done through the purchase of international permits.
There's a lot of... But you know that uncertainty comes from not just the coalition's campaign at all. There's a lot of uncertainty relating to the Eurozone, the prospect of a Greek default, the impact on European banks. There's a lot of uncertainty in the global economic environment. Why not capitalise on our strength and just hold things off for a while?
Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of the world is moving to address this critical issue of ensuring that we meet our environmental target, and also improving the way we operate as an economy and the way we use our resources and have less environmental impact. There's always, at any given point in time, there will be uncertainty. At any given point in time, there will be people that don't want you to pursue reform. We're doing what we have to do to meet an international commitment that both sides of politics have made to cut emissions.
Josh,
north of our border, just to let you know, north of our border, Indonesia plan to cut their emissions by 26%.
Do they have a carbon tax?
They plan to cut, and there are others that are moving to ETSs in our region, including our neighbours.
Okay, Josh Frydenberg, I want to ask you about Tony Abbott's commitment, promised in blood to scrap the carbon tax. He also... obviously, this is separate to the broken promise that the Prime Minister obviously made, promising no carbon tax. Now she's delivering one, so there was a broken promise there. Correct. That said, okay, let's look at Tony Abbott. He said roll gold guarantee, wouldn't touch the Medicare safety net. 2004, straight after the election, what happened? He did. Now he's promised in blood to scrap the carbon tax? Why should we not see it in the same light?
Kieran, what we're talking,
he's got form as well.
Kieran, what we're talking about here is an economic-wide reform. Well, they call it a reform. We don't. We call it an economic-wide tax in terms of the carbon tax, which is completely different to any other piece of legislation that this country has faced. When we in the coalition introduced the GST, John Howard went to a new election, pretty tough, and he won.
But
that's
Mr.
what Julia
Abbott's got
Gillard.
form on breaking promises
no, he
as
hasn't.
well.
No, he
The
hasn't
Medicare
at all.
safety net
No,
was.
he hasn't at all. What we are talking here is about a economic-wide reform, and despite what Ed says, Kieran, it is completely out of sync with what the rest of the world. The Productivity Commission actually said no other country is introducing a economy-wide tax. I mean, if you look what's happening in China, you look what's happening in India, you look what's happening in Canada, if you even look what's happening in Indonesia, they don't have a carbon tax. And Ed, by the way, conveniently left out one major point. And that is that this carbon tax is born out of the political weakness of our Prime Minister. It's actually designed to do a deal with the Greens to retain government. That's what this is all about.
A couple of years ago at Husic, there was a lot of momentum towards trading schemes in everywhere across the world in the lead up to Copenhagen. There was a lot of support in Australia. That's dissipated almost entirely in terms of the support for the carbon tax. Very little support for that. And support for climate change action has also been has reduced dramatically over the last couple of years. Do you feel that, like Labor and the timing of this is just all wrong?
No. There's a reform. This is a reform for tomorrow. This is something that has to get done. This is something that we are doing to meet a bipartisan commitment, 5% cut in emissions by 2020. We can't afford to wait anymore. We've waited for 20 years. We've gone through 35 parliamentary inquiries. We've had people saying that this needs to be done. The test of this reform will be, obviously, in the years to come when people go, what was the fuss about? Because, you know, when the introduction of the GST, prices went up 2.5%. Again, you're talking about conveniently forgetting things. You conveniently forget that. We are only going to see a 0.7% increase as a result of not, as it's been suggested, this economy-wide, everyone having an impact. The top companies, the top emitters, the top 500, trying to get them to change the way they behave.
Let me ask Josh Frydenberg about the behaviour of Sophie Mirabella last night. Is it a lack of discipline to be kicked out by one of your own members of the Liberal Party? The Deputy Speaker, Peter Slipper, kicked Sophie Mirabella out for 24 hours. It means she's going to miss this very important vote. And, you know, in the context of Steve Chobo, another Liberal MP, flies back from, a time at the United Nations where he's on a parliamentary delegation. He flew back from New York for the vote. And she was kicked out last night. Isn't that irresponsible?
Well, Kieran, actually, Labor has a lot to answer for here. You know why? Because Sophie Mirabella was actually trying to table 1,200 signatures against the carbon tax from her own electorate. It's normally convention.
But Peter Slipper was the Speaker at the time, the Deputy Speaker.
But Labor actually did not give her the right to table those signatures as is normal convention. No, as a normal convention. And hang on, Labor is now listening to Bob Brown, but not allowing the Parliament to listen to the views of its constituents.
She was kicked out by your colleague Peter Slipper.
Yeah, but what was the context? What was the context? It was a rough and tumble debate over the carbon tax, which was actually particularly about her right to table the 1,200 signatures. Sophie was absolutely right to take it.
Not irresponsible to be going to be kicked out.
She's a front bencher. She's a front player. She's been front and centre to this whole carbon tax debate. And the fact that we are winning the public argument on this, Sophie can take a lot of the credit.
She's chipping in for Steve's trip back to the US as well as a goodwill gesture. I love this guy defending democracy.
And you know what you are? You're a kamikaze pilot. You're flying on your last mission. With this carbon tax, you are a kamikaze pilot flying on your last mission, mate.
You're saying we're talking about democracy and we're talking about people having a say, and of 27 people of our shadow cabinet, one person hasn't spoken. Malcolm Turnbull. So
right, deflection.
I want to ask you about the migration bill just quickly.
Please.
I know you guys are going to go.
He wants to deflect that. He doesn't want to talk about Malcolm Turnbull.
Let's move on. And I want to ask you about the migration bill. There'll be plenty of people in your party happy if this gets knocked off tomorrow. There's a lot of your own colleagues who don't support the changes to the migration bill?
No. Can I just say, in all seriousness, Josh, I mean, you I don't know if you've heard, I have a very strong view about offshore processing. I don't accept this notion that governments should be blind to the idea or the concept of people taking that risky 2-day journey. You know, I was a union official in former life. If I ever went to an employer who said to me, we employ 100 people in any given year and 4 people are going to die, but they're doing it because they're trying to earn a living, I would never accept that. So for me, I feel very strongly about the need for offshore processing, and I'm very disappointed we can't find... Well, that's a diversity. There's a diversity of opinion. Let me get to that. I'll come back to this. There's a diversity of opinions, obviously, in the party room, and we've had very extensive and very solid and very good discussions about it. But in terms of Nauru, Josh, not even the UNHCR supports that. It's just a transit lounge. I mean, we need to be able to find a way to create a disincentive for people being able to profit off the desperation of others.
The Prime Minister, though, Ed, did yesterday in the party room say that the platform, the ALP platform, was all things to everyone, and that flagging that the national conference, that things and this debate could be wound up in that. Is that a signal that offshore processing might be dumped?
No, I don't think so. I think there are a lot of people that are trying to find a way, and there's a lot of concern. As much as you highlight the concern of others on this issue, there are concern across a number of people about the issue of people undertaking this risky trip. We are going to find some way, somehow, to try and create those disincentives.
Well, Kieran, can I just say...
let me ask you first, if I can ask you a question about this. Isn't it? And I did ask Tony Abbott this question at a news conference yesterday. He didn't really answer it. I wonder if you can, demanding that countries be signatories to the UN Convention on Refugees on the one hand, yet your platform is that you'd turn back boats to countries which aren't signatories to the UN Convention.
Well,
you'd be happy to turn back boats.
But they actually haven't arrived here. They actually haven't arrived here in Australia.
What's the outcome, though? The people are processed in countries that aren't signatories. That's the bottom line.
Well, what about they're wanting to send people to Malaysia? I mean, the point here is we want an effective deterrent.
What's wrong with Malaysia?
We want an effective... No, I tell you what's wrong with Malaysia. They're not a signatory to the Convention.
Can I focus on... We've targeted Ed and their issues, but about the coalition, it does seem inconsistent to demand that countries are signatories to the UN Convention on Refugees on the one hand, as part of this vote tomorrow, which you're doing, and yet on the other you're saying, we're happy to turn boats back to countries that aren't signatories. It just seems inconsistent.
We want an effective deterrent in place, and that's got 3 parts, and these 3 parts, may I say, Kieran, have been absolutely consistent for more than a decade in terms of coalition policy, so this is not something new. TPVs, towing back the boats where possible, and offshore processing. Let's understand.
But now you've thrown in the requirement of the UN Refugee Convention. Where did that emerge from? Was it just political opportunism?
No. Well, Nauru is a signatory to the UN Convention.
It is now. It wasn't under John Howard.
We didn't need it because we had Section 198A of the Migration Act, which actually provided for 2 things: offshore processing and actually the protection of people. And if you actually look at the judges' judgments in the High Court case recently, where the government failed on Malaysia, they specifically said Nauru was a completely different situation to Malaysia because actually Australians were controlling the treatment of people.
I want to get... Ed, you can respond to that, but let me ask you about the Nauru situation. The government and the Howard government, as it has argued, the coalition, that it did have control over processing in Nauru. Labor wouldn't in Malaysia. Before I get you to respond, though, I just should point out to our viewers we've got live pictures of the House of Representatives ahead of the carbon tax vote, and we're going to stay through on this vote right through this historic vote.
We can't miss it, though.
No, I'll let you go. You've got 20 seconds.
20 seconds. I love that he put an asterisk at the point of, we said we turn around the boats where possible, because the election advertising never said and never had that little asterisk that said where possible. It was to stop the boats. That was what your line was.
We're stopping the boats because we're having a deterrent policy.
Nauru is a $1 billion resort.
Can I just say, Kieran, 12,000 unauthorised arrivals since Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd came to government. In the last 5 years of the Howard government, only 16 boats, 245 boats for humans in 2008.
Why don't you two continue the discussion on the way to the House of Representatives? I'll let you go. Our viewers can't view that, unfortunately, but I'm sure...
The proof is in the pudding of our
policy. Put that on
policy.
the main event.
Okay, we'll get a camera to follow you down there. All right, Phyllis, I'll let you go.
Kieran.
And as I mentioned, we're going to stay on the House of Representatives now for this vote with the government expected